With us now on set, we got former Secretary of State John Kerry. So great to have you here.
Happy to be here.
We're here, of course, to talk about what everybody's talking about.
Richard,
that is the Boston Red Sox winning again in extra innings last night.
I know, extra innings.
That's.
We got at least 3 people here who can't wait for the playoffs.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Maybe more, Willie. I don't know.
Yankee fans, Richard and I, yeah.
I said at least 3 people.
Exactly. So you just got back from Ukraine. We're going to get to the UN speech in a second, but you just got back from Ukraine. What can you tell us about the state of affairs there?
Well, they're in a critical place. They've got to make fundamental decisions about corruption, getting rid of it. They need to attract private investment. The government has to show that it's serious.
How much of a shadow does Russia still cast over?
Enormous, obviously. It's the ball game. But they really have their destiny in their own hands. It's up to them to decide that they are going to be a model nation for transformation. And they're still stuck. They're trying to have it both ways. And I think we made it very clear, Richard, myself, others who were there, that this is a critical moment for them.
Richard, any fear of any realistic fear in Ukraine of the Russians moving westward?
No, I think people understand that Crimea is not coming back anytime soon. The most interesting positive thing is the Russians put out an offer about, 2 weeks ago now, talking about peacekeeping forces in the eastern part of Ukraine. And the question is, does that mean that maybe Putin understand some of the costs of what they're doing? Are they beginning to look for something of an exit? I don't know, but the recommendation everybody made to the Ukrainian government, we all saw the president, was why don't you at least explore that? Why don't you see if the Russians are up to something, whether it's a ploy, expose it. If it's not a ploy, work with it.
The president brought up Ukraine yesterday in the speech before the United Nations, didn't really dig into it much deeper. I'm curious, what did you think of the speech overall? What is America standing right now on the
Joe, I think, you all have talked about it a fair amount already, but look, what is the purpose of a speech by the President of the United States to the United Nations? It is to sell America's policy. It is to bring countries to the table in order to achieve your goals. And the President gave a speech about America First, which winds up, in effect, I think, making America last and diplomacy last, or making America alone, fundamentally. It pushes people away. The sort of childish kind of, the rhetoric. If name-calling was going to solve this problem, Donald Trump would have already solved the problem. So that's not going to move anybody to do what you have to do. You have to ask yourself, is America safer because of Rocket Man? Did we bring anybody to the table as a consequence of that language? You don't give a speech at the United Nations to talk to your base. There are plenty of opportunities to do that. You give a speech at the United Nations to bring people to the table. What do you need more than anything? You need China to do things. China provides 100% of the fuel to North Korea. Every plane, every truck, every car that moves in North Korea, China's doing that. Every bit of North Korea's financing goes through Chinese banks. China could shut North Korea down in 1 week. 2 days.
Why don't they?
Because they keep saying we're afraid of the stability issue. We're afraid there's going to be there'll be implosion of the regime. In reality, Joe, I think the reason is that they are fearful that they don't know what comes afterwards for sure. But that could, in fact, be guaranteed. There are ways, and I've talked to a number of people, there are absolutely ways in which to guarantee a transition here, guarantee something happens. So, look, I think that, and also, he invokes the Marshall Plan. Well, I love the Marshall Plan. I've recommended that we have a modern-day Marshall Plan that, in fact, uses the private sector to do the things we need to do to combat terrorism and to grow countries and deal with young people who have no jobs. Did he mention? No. He has a 37% cut in the budget. That's his recommendation.
Really?
So I really think the speech lost an opportunity to be able to do what President should do there, not isolate America in the minds of lots of leaders, but bring people together. He really should have made the case for China. That would have been a legitimate diplomatic gambit, to make the case for why China and how China can do more. I think that would have been valuable.
When you were Secretary of State dealing with the North Korean problem, what were the most hopeful avenues for you? Where did you say, maybe we can get a deal done to stop the nuclear program this way? And why didn't it happen if it was?
Well, there were a lot of, but I keep hearing people say, hey, we tried this for 25 years. we've had diplomacy and it didn't work. No, that's not true. We have less sanctions against North Korea today, which has a nuclear weapon, than we had against Iran, which did not have a nuclear weapon. Now, how do you figure that out? We actually brought more pressure to bear on Iran to come to the table and negotiate. So when people say we've tried everything, no, we haven't tried everything. We need to put greater pressure on sanctions, because that's the way you exhaust diplomacy. And if Donald Trump is ever going to get to the point where he has to, quote, destroy North Korea, which we all understand, this could come to blows. But you don't have to brandish that every moment so that it's always the big stick and no talk, literally, softly or otherwise. You've got to have both. And there's no sense here of a diplomatic initiative or effort by them to actually bring Russia, bring China to the table to do this. Now, you look at what we did over a period of time with Iran. It took us 35 years to actually get Iran right. And we finally got Iran right, as George Mitchell once said, you know, you have 1,000 bad days in negotiations and one good day. It takes patience. And what we need to do with North Korea is actually work with China, Russia, others, to ratchet those sanctions up to a point where they have an impact and exhaust the possibilities of diplomacy so that if it came to blows, everybody in the world would understand why. It's a last resort, not a first resort.
But didn't you just say China was not a willing partner right now in doing that because of all the reasons you
China
laid out?
has ratcheted up 4 times. We went to China, we ratcheted up sanctions, then we ratcheted them up a second time. I have supported the Trump administration in their diplomacy to try to ratchet up. We had oil embargo sanction proposal in the last round. The Chinese walked that back. But we did ratchet up. Now, with the last firing, we have a reason to put even more pressure on and go back to China. But look, you've got to go through that process. And by the way, and this is really important, talking about getting rid of the Iran deal and going after Iran, we're all aware that Iran is doing things we don't like, and there are things we want Iran to stop doing. But if you go after the Iran deal in Iran the way he did yesterday, and you talk about throwing it out, you make your diplomatic efforts of solving North Korea far more complicated. What does North Korea think, looking at the way he's talking about shredding a deal that was made? If that's the way America behaves in the world, throwing out something that works because you don't like it, but it works, you're actually inviting a much more difficult path.
Mike Barnicle.
With
another deal that's on the verge of being shredded, the Paris Accord. It hasn't been spoken about much, but apparently the Trump administration is on the path to withdraw from the Paris Accord. What are the dangers inherent in that?
Well, we just had a 2-day conference at Yale that ended yesterday. Secretary Jim Baker, former Republican Secretary of Treasury and Secretary of State, came. He spoke about the need to price carbon. We had Hank Paulson, former Republican conservative Secretary of Treasury. We had Jeff Immelt of General Electric. We had a group of former secretaries of energy and special envoys, all of whom talked about how what we're seeing today should convince people that they need to move on climate change. Irma, first hurricane to ever have sustained winds over 185 miles an hour for 24 hours. Harvey, largest record rainfall in the history of hurricanes. Wildfires burning out of control in the western part of our country. The evidence is building all around the world. Every leader in Africa, every leader in Europe, most leaders in Asia, all believe that climate change is happening and mankind is pushing it into faster acceleration. So Paris, almost 200 nations came together, and all of them agreed simultaneously not to accept a burden imposed by any other country. Donald Trump has not told the truth to the American people about this. The burden that we've accepted is one we defined. So he doesn't have to pull out of Paris. All he has to do is change the targets.
Right. When he's talking about terms that are more acceptable to the American people, they're terms that we set.
The terms
ourselves.
that America
They're
set ourselves
voluntary.
that he could change and voluntary. But
System with American sovereignty.
Here's the
Right, by
good
the way.
news, though, Joe. 29 states in America have already passed renewable portfolio laws. 8 states have voluntary laws. So you have 38 states in America, the governors of which are going to convene today at 12:30 here in New York. Many of those governors are going to announce they're going to continue to meet Paris. So while the president may say, I'm pulling out of Paris, the American people, 80% of the American people are in these 38 states. They're going to continue on. Mayors are going to continue on, governors, and we're actually going to meet the Paris standards, and I think we can exceed them if we do what technology allows us to do.
Got David Ignatius in Washington, then Richard Haas. David Ignatius.
Mr. Secretary, I want to come back to Iran. You know Iran better than any American diplomat. Do you think there's any way to make progress on the things that President Trump talked about yesterday, dealing with Iranian missile testing, dealing with Iranian regional behavior, in some way trying to figure out a way to extend the duration of this agreement without blowing that agreement up?
Absolutely. And I have reason to believe that because I met with Foreign Minister Zarif in Norway, in Oslo, some months ago, and we raised every one of those issues. He has stated that with the European community in the region, they are prepared to deal directly with those countries that are involved. So with respect to Saudi Arabia, Iran says we are prepared to immediately engage in conversation with Saudi Arabia. And they are prepared to discuss regional security issues that would have a profound impact on changing the dynamic. So if you don't explore diplomacy, if you don't push the possibilities of conversation, if all you do is rattle the saber, you are shutting off the opportunity to do these kinds. And yesterday, it was made more difficult because of the level of insult. You can raise the issues. There are ways to do it. But the way it was done yesterday will make it harder for them to engage with us. But they are, I know, absolutely prepared to engage with Europe and with the regional countries, and that should be put to the test.
Mr. Secretary, your successor has made a focus to downsize the amount of resources available to diplomacy, to shrink the department. He hasn't filled a lot of positions. Yeah. Do you think you can succeed as Secretary of State with the kind of trajectory Secretary Tillerson has taken?
Well, I think it's extremely difficult to do diplomacy without diplomats. The world needs more of the leadership of the United States that is calculated to reach out and build alliances and do the things we need to do. There are 2 billion people, 2 billion young people in the world, under the age of 15. 1.8 billion between the ages of 15 and 24. Many of them are in places where extremists are recruiting them, bringing them over because they don't have opportunity, they don't have a say in their country, they don't have a possibility of a future. We need to be deeply engaged in making democracy and possibilities of legitimate opportunity and work and taking our values and marketing them. That's the best of American diplomacy. When you cut off the ability of your ambassadors to be, we don't have ambassadors in many of the critical countries in the world. We don't have assistant secretaries of state to meet. Countries have told me we don't know who to talk to.
Yeah.
So how does the world get safer if you're not doing the hard work of diplomacy?
Secretary John Kerry, thank you so much. Really quickly, you're tan, you're rested, you're ready, you're younger than everybody else talking about running for president of the United States. Is it Kerry 2020?
I don't have any plans right now, honestly. I have no
that's
plans.
not a denial.
That's not
Say
it.
right now?
Not right now.
Well, I mean, I'm not thinking about it, guys. I'm working.
And again, younger than most people talking about running right now in the Democratic Party. All right, thank you so much.
You're a troublemaker.
No.
See you.
We think we may see you again on the campaign trail. Still. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.